politics in crypto continues, but definitely interesting to see Donald Trump touting an orange coin on CNBC Monday morning.
I think it's only a matter of time before he buys it, man. And I think it's only a matter of time before, I mean, how many issues in our day are there where you can have people on both sides of the aisle come around and say, you know what, it's not bad. Good morning and welcome into another edition of the biggest headlines in crypto, brought to you from all of us here at Coinage. I'm the host of Coinage, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studio here in New York City as Bitcoin explodes past 72,000 and the party is on, celebrating. Near side me here is Andre Bagansky, the head writer here at Coinage. Andre, GM, sir.
GM, Zach, and GM, everyone else. Yeah, Bitcoin setting a new all-time high. Donald Trump, talking Bitcoin on CNBC. Lots to be excited about these days, huh?
And there's a huge battle going on between Wall Street and the rest of everyone else in crypto as we're watching this kind of back and forth between Michael Saylor over the weekend. We were talking about BlackRock surpassing them. Now you got Michael Saylor and MicroStrategy scooping up another 12,000 Bitcoin. We're looking at the record inflows coming in here into all of these digital asset funds, according to the CoinShares report. Andre, we track this every Monday. James Butterfield and CoinShares, and it's another record week of inflows.
I mean, another record, another busy week for these ETFs on Wall Street, really sort of changing the dynamic there. You can clearly see, I mean, the chart looks so different to me, Zach, than it did just a few months ago. Really, the impact of these ETFs cannot be understated. And of course, we're going to dig into that later in the show. But we've also got some news involving Pantera, CBDCs, as I mentioned, Trump, but also some L2 savings and what to expect when Dencun is activated this week. So
yeah, it's a big week, a busy week, a lot of headlines to dig into. And of course, it's much more than just price. If you just want to look at the number go up, that's fine. But if you want to dig into the weeds a little bit, that's what this show's here for. And why don't we kick off, Andre, with just the latest here? Because as much as we talk about Bitcoin, it's really, I think, as far as cycles go, Ethereum normally the one that carries the baton further in the cycle. And one thing that is going to be key to that happening this time around is the approval of an Ethereum ETF. Have you seen what's happened with fund inflows? We were just talking about Bitcoin. It's supposedly going to happen with Ethereum if, and this is a big if, it gets approved.
If the SEC lets it, indeed, Zach. And, we'd be remiss to not mention the fact that Ethereum is now over $4,000 for the first time in quite a long time. But yes, the Coinbase met with the SEC last week just to present Grayscale's proposed Ethereum ETF. Essentially, they have this $11 billion fund, which is not too dissimilar from their Grayscale Bitcoin Trust. It's called the Ethereum Grayscale Trust, and $11 billion. The Coinbase specifically points out in this meeting that the Ethereum spot market is resilient to fraud and manipulation. So sort of presenting some counterpoints, I guess, to any denial that may be in the pipeline. For those that aren't aware, the SEC for a decade, Zach, pointed to the spot Bitcoin market and talked about fraud and manipulation as sort of the basis for denying these ETFs one after another. And, this is important as it relates to the Ethereum ETF and the prospects of one getting launched this year. It's something that a lot of market watchers are they're either over 50% or under 50%. I definitely think this starts to change my calculus in terms of that. But, we have a tweet that we're going to show from Eleanor Tourette of Fox Business, because she's saying that the SEC staff is, quote, not really engaging in meaningful ways, quote, on an Ethereum ETF. She cited people familiar with recent meetings and the regulator talking about the inside baseball there between Gary Gensler approving the spot Bitcoin ETFs and facing potentially some political pressure as a result of that, and not necessarily wanting to get an Ethereum ETF right out the door. Definitely sounds a little political to me, Zach, but Eric Balkunis from Bloomberg does point out that there is no court loss hanging over the SEC's head at this point, which was a key factor when it comes to approving these Bitcoin ETFs. On top of that, he did say that the SEC staff has not given any comments yet to these issuers, these asset managers that want a spot Ethereum ETF. So, I don't know about you, Zach, but, the odds definitely slipping below 50% in my mind. You were somebody who was pretty bullish on this not too long ago. So,
well, I was just based off of kind of, the confidence that we had heard from Commissioner Peirce about how this shouldn't go the same way that the Bitcoin ETFs went. But at the same time, if you're in a knife fight and you don't bring a gun, what's going to happen. And that's kind of, I think, what's happened here, right? Because the SEC's back was up against the wall with the approval of Bitcoin ETFs because they had lost in appeals court to Grayscale, and basically had no other option than to approve. And that's not the case here, really. That hasn't happened. They haven't missed the deadline, and that's kind of what everyone's watching for May. So, yes. Was I optimistic before? Yeah, I was. But at the same time, I also, before that, was not so optimistic. So it's gone back and forth with every new headline. And I will say the reason why we're talking about it now is because things are marginally moving farther from positive territory into, let's be a little bit more skeptical here. So, I mean, would that ruin anything? I don't know. There's enough optimism and enough kind of positive movement right now to where you don't need an ETH ETF approval right away. And again, just if it doesn't happen in May, what does that mean? I don't know. It's an election year anyways. So, like, do we need to go through Gary Gensler? I don't know. We'll see how the election goes. But regardless, if you kick the can down the road, I do think all signs point to, and we were going to talk about this, the approval looks very similar when it comes to futures, spot trading correlations. Is it as strong as Bitcoin? I was reading maybe not, but also not like devastatingly so that it wouldn't get approved on those grounds. So I guess we'll see. But
well, in terms of the court's logic, one thing that really in their decision, that appellate court decision that saw, you know, the DC court sort of poke holes in the SEC's logic, they sort of said, like, you know, Ethereum futures ETFs trade for Bitcoin, therefore you should let a spot one in. And, you know, we do have Ethereum futures ETFs in the US, so that could potentially come in play.
But you and I were on the ground at ETH Denver. You didn't get the sense that they needed an ETH ETF for that excitement to continue, right?
No, not in any sense. But if you look at
I'm saying.
If you look at the way ETFs have affected Bitcoin over the past few months, I think, you know, it's only fair that the Ethereum crowd or people who are holding Ethereum would want some of these ETFs, because clearly opening up to institutional capital has been good for Bitcoin. But, you know, you mentioned that May 23rd deadline. It's important to inform people, you know, that's the final decision deadline for the next spot Ethereum ETF application. So as we get closer to May 23rd, we'll definitely have more reporting on that.
Yeah, and if you just look at the chart too, it just seems like there's no reaction to necessarily this kind of new outlook in terms of where the odds are. And I think, again, it just goes to show right now, all eyes are just focused on fund flows. And the narrative normally doesn't turn until it turns. And I think we've got probably a few more weeks of gasoline left in the tank to continue rallying on funds. It's weird because remember in the early days, like even right before these got, or right when they got approved, the narrative was basically like, hey, this isn't going so well. It's kind of stalled out. And then
we disapprove them? I think
some people remember that? Everyone's like, yeah. And now here we are. So who knows? It's always one thing and then the other, but I think we still got a few weeks. And speaking of that, Andre, it's a good transition point because over the weekend, we were tracking this kind of battle between the biggest Bitcoin ETF right now, which is BlackRock's, and the old man carrying the torch, Michael Saylor, because it finally happened, ladies and gents. BlackRock flipped MicroStrategy and their 193,000 Bitcoin in holding, as BlackRock now has 195-ish. So the run ended, Andre, sadly.
Hey, I mean, MicroStrategy had a good one. You know, in terms of this, it really is that story, right, of Wall Street versus, I guess, you know, Wall Street minus. MicroStrategy, obviously a publicly traded company, but not necessarily a household name in terms of finance, right? So, I mean, Zach, your modeling had this to be midsummer originally. It's happened a lot faster than either of us, I think, really expected.
Well, I mean, you think about Eric Balchunas. He was saying that it was going to take a year for BlackRock to basically get there. A year or two. And it took 60 days. And then, not so fast, by the way, Michael Saylor swoops in and goes ahead and scoops up another 12,000 Bitcoin today.
We do have a visual for that one. Yes, coming off the wires this morning, we did hear that MicroStrategy was able to buy more Bitcoin. it was around 10,000, I believe, if I've got that correct.
He got 12,000.
12,000 Bitcoin, right? So pulling ahead just in front of MicroStrategy again. I mean, for all we know, based off of like when these were purchased, like it could be that MicroStrategy kept that lead for that much longer. But you know, if you're Michael Saylor, do you go to bed, you know, thinking about just the ways that you can get more Bitcoin at night, especially when you've got like BlackRock on your heels like this, Zach?
Texas, I don't know if you can see my chart now, but I mean, he made me have to update my chart this morning because it looks so funny. This little tiny blip here is basically what you could have seen coming because MicroStrategy had that debt sale last week, right? And it was 600, then it was 700 million. And everyone's like, wonder what he's going to do with that. Surprise, surprise. And maybe the least surprising news, Michael Saylor buys more Bitcoin, but it's just funny because obviously it's like he's in a canoe going up against the Carnival cruise liner. Like, BlackRock is the world's largest asset manager. They're not holding this Bitcoin for themselves. It's an unfair comparison, but I do like the fact that, I mean, we've been covering this rise for the last few weeks, and I just like the fact that as soon as he's surpassed, he gets one last little grasp at holding more than BlackRock.
Yeah, and you know what's interesting for me? Like, he's got so much Bitcoin at this point, MicroStrategy, right? But their average cost is still relatively low, lower than you might expect. I mean, their portfolio is currently valued at around $14.7 billion. But when you look at that average cost, $33,000. A lot of people looking at that right now saying, I wish that was my cost basis, probably.
There is also one more important thing to tease out here, too, because we talk about this battle. Some people don't like talking about BlackRock and all these Wall Street giants getting into Bitcoin and holding more now than MicroStrategy in just 60 days versus the more than 1,000 days it took MicroStrategy to stack that many sats. But it's part of the narrative, Andre, and it's something that, you know, is interesting to look at. JP Morgan was also out with a new research report that said the total Bitcoin ETF market could reach $62 billion in the next 2 to 3 years. That number might seem low to people who have been talking about digital gold flipping real gold, which is a more than $3 trillion market. So you might say, how is that even possible? But it's different when you look at the Bitcoin ETF market versus Bitcoin as a whole. And they looked at this in terms of a risk-adjusted basis in trying to match this. And I think that this is pretty interesting. They said that, you know, even if Bitcoin matched gold, it wouldn't necessarily be a fair thing to say that, okay, that would mean Bitcoin's price should be double where it is. They actually have it more in the $44,000 range, somewhere around there, when you adjust for risk capital terms and applying a volatility ratio of 3.7, just whatever that means, to basically say that you should only have a market of about $62 billion over the next 2 to 3 years for Bitcoin ETFs. And they're at $10 billion now in terms of net inflows. So that, to me, seems like another short of the line to gain prediction. Yeah. I don't necessarily agree with that.
2 to 3 years for that, for like a $62 billion market. You know, obviously, like, people at JP Morgan know it maybe a little bit better than me, but it does seem a little bit low, especially when you consider the fact that we're already a sixth of the way there. And when you look at, we had some of the reporting up from CoinShares. I don't know if we can bring that chart up real quickly again, but when you look at CoinShares, they're talking about how sort of at this point the inflows are about to set a record in terms of compared to their 2021 counterpoint in terms of like the yearly inflows. And it's only 3 months here. So, I mean, clearly 2021 or 2024 setting up to outpace 2021 in terms of those overall inflows. But a $62 billion market after 2 to 3 years, Zach, not
seems
sure about
low.
that. Seems
I think it seems low. And I don't know. I mean, again, obviously the JP Morgan camp has not exactly been the most bullish in terms of covering crypto. We've seen that before. But I think that it does to me seem low. And also, again, we've seen many people, including even the Bloomberg analysts, get a lot of this wrong in terms of how much excitement, pent-up demand there was. And as Matt Hogan told us from Bitwise, we haven't even really hit the advisor phase of all this, where people are actually selling clients exposure to Bitcoin via these ETFs. That takes weeks. And so we're really just kind of there. I mean, I'm firmly in the camp, by the way, of where the price target goes, north of 100K, as we've talked about this at some point. Of course, these things go up. By the way, I don't think enough people are talking about the way that things could reverse. I mean, these ETFs do what clients want. If there are people selling these things, they drop their Bitcoin, and that adds selling pressure. We have not seen the cycle flip in that sense. And so live by the sword, die by the sword. I think it could start to have some of that reflexivity. We all know this in the negative direction. But when the party's gone, you do not poop on the party, Andre. So I will not bring that up now.
It's a good way of putting it, Zach. No, especially when you look at the flows, the way that they're coming in week after week, you know, it doesn't sort of paint this picture in my mind that these inflows are slowing down at any point.
No.
And you talked about JP Morgan being a little bit of a critic in the beginning when it comes to Bitcoin. I mean, like in January 25th, they did say that the performance of these flows was disappointing. But I don't think anybody is really saying that at this point, Zach.
No, it's quite the opposite. And it's not just Bitcoin, which I feel like, you know, we've covered enough. Maybe we move on to the other altcoins, because at some point, a lot of this will spill over. It hasn't necessarily happened just yet, unless you're looking, of course, at Solana. And I think that that's a good transition point to maybe check in on what Pantera is looking at when it comes to these opportunities. And if you haven't been paying attention to the Solana chart, I'll just bring this up right now. 148, it wasn't too long ago we were at $100 a coin for Solana,
or $15 a coin for that matter.
If you want to go back, to the worst of days.
No, but we have a story up from Blockworks to show, which is that Pantera wants to create a $250 million private fund, which is going to buy Solana tokens at a discount from the FTX estate, Zach. That's 39% below its 30-day average price, and a vesting period of up to 4 years. So really locking up your capital to own some of these Solana tokens. But yeah, I mean, apparently I had no idea that the FTX estate holds 10% of all Solana tokens.
Good old SBF, baby. Good old SBF had an early jump.
No, but I mean, like, that did come up at SBF's trial quite a bit. The fact that he was like a backer of Solana and that he was even buying it for 20 cents a SOL at one point, right? But 10% is quite a lot of Solana, Zach.
It is, but I mean, again, it shows kind of where these bets are, and again, shout out to the team at Solana, and it's always been on the show a number of times. We've talked to him about the tech, we've talked to him about surviving that collapse and having quote unquote Solana be labeled a Sam coin, and yeah, I mean, I think it's huge. We're going to be chatting with Pantera later on today. This afternoon to get a better sense of what opportunities they see in this market right now. But I think that that's another one that Sean Farrell from Fundstrat was calling out as a new all-time high is basically in the cards for Solana this year.
500 or 600, right?
And so, I mean, we'll just go back to the chart. I mean, look, you might think I missed the boat on Solana, right? I think it's pretty fair to say. If you're just tuning in this year and you're like, ah, damn, what the hell, I missed it. But, I mean, you zoom out, and again, where do you want to put your money in this market? Would you want to put it on one of the altcoins that still has not really exploded? Actually, that's not fair to say. It has exploded this cycle big time. But is there still room to run? I mean, we're pretty early, Andre, I think, in this cycle.
Obviously, some people at Pantera Capital also think so as well, Zach.
I suppose.
And, it's interesting. Apparently, you need to have 25 million in order to get into this fund. And for me, I'm like kind of thinking over here, like maybe we should let former FTX customers get in on this for a lower price potentially, right? Because they're getting paid pennies on the dollar for the SOL that they had in their FTX accounts at the time. Which, correct me if I'm wrong, but this is that Solana that they're getting paid pennies on the dollar for? The FTX bankruptcy, one of the things that sticks out in my mind is how they're paying people at the prices. They're paying people in cash, Zach, for the crypto that they had when FTX collapsed at the price of when FTX collapsed itself. So that's
don't get me started on this one, man. This is still a fresh wound as I watch the BlockFi thing play out, and you got Zach Prince taking a new job out there, and he's talking about that, but that's a different story. We're not getting into that for now. But if you are watching on Twitter right now, hit us up in the DMs, hit us up in the comments. Let us know what more you want to hear about here, because my frustrations are my frustrations, and Andre's joys are his joys. But we always like hearing from y'all as a community-owned show. And Andre, I guess we can move along here to the next one, because we've been talking about this as a piece in this being an election year, CBDCs, and I guess all of the political candidates now hopping on the bandwagon and saying, I will not allow a CBDC. And yet you have the Fed chair, Jay Powell, coming out and saying it's not really that big of a concern that you need to be worried about, which I think is hilarious.
Yeah, so the Fed chair Jerome Powell said recently that the Fed is nowhere near even recommending, let alone adopting, a CBDC in the United States. And it's just the latest in terms of comments saying, like, guys, like, this is not something that you need to worry about. It's far out in terms of that. And the reason why it's important is because CBDCs are really becoming a wedge issue in terms of these upcoming presidential elections, Zach. We've seen Tom Emmer on Capitol Hill really adopt this stance first, coming out and saying that, like, this technology could be used to potentially surveil Americans or be able to, prevent them from making purchases in some cases. I believe it was actually Governor Ron DeSantis who said you could use a CBDC to stop people from buying gasoline, firearms, beef was another one that he took up. So, it's really interesting to see the anti-CBDC stance really proliferate on the Republican Republican side. And obviously we're going to get into it later. And you have RFK Jr., who was a Democrat, now running as an independent, who was very anti-CBDC. But, I found this comment interesting, Zach, because he did say that, the last thing the Federal Reserve wants is for Americans to have an individual account with them. And that if they were to do a CBDC eventually, that private banks would be involved in some ways. So a little bit different in terms of what countries are pioneering these days in terms of the CBDC tech.
No, you're definitely right. And I feel like, it's always good to run on fear. I mean, historically, that's been a great political strategy. So I don't think that it's new here to maybe shout out, okay, the government is wanting to surveil you. And we have seen, again, the Canada truckers protesters, as we've covered at Coinage before. There is precedent for governments turning off access to money, and RFK is right that it is a concern. But attaching it to a CBDC and where the U.S. is, I think Jay Powell is definitely right. He's not lying about how slow the government is in applying some of this technology and getting everything right. They've been talking about stablecoins, by the way, and we have seen Congress take year after year try and figure out stablecoin regulation. So they do take their sweet, sweet time. And I do believe him when he says we're not anywhere near it because we move slow. And so I don't think that he's lying here. And I don't think, by the way, even though he's saying this, you're not going to see RFK stop talking about it. And you're not going to see the Republicans stop talking about CBDCs and government overreach.
There is a little bit of an inside baseball here in terms of like what actually is a CBDC based off of my reporting that I've done in the past, which is this idea of like a retail CBDC versus what they call a wholesale CBDC. And like the retail CBDC is something that like, someone like you or I would use to purchase a cup of coffee. But, the Fed has done experiments with this other tech in the past where you can use a CBDC for interbank settlements. So essentially the way that, funds flow throughout the banking system in the United States, potentially making that more efficient. But as Powell said, not
nowhere
something you
near
need to worry about.
Well, I think it's a good segue though, Andre, because little do we know, it continues to be a hot button issue in politics. And Donald Trump out this morning talking about Bitcoin yet again as we see it move north of $72,000 a coin. First time we've seen that ever. And he was on CNBC. We have a clip, I believe, of him talking about his changed views on Bitcoin after he's experimented with NFTs. Take a listen to what President Donald Trump has to say.
Sometimes we'll let people pay through Bitcoin, or we'll let people get involved in a new. If you think of it, it's an additional form of currency. And I used to say, I want one currency. I want the dollar. I don't want people leaving the dollar. And I feel that way. But I will tell you, it has taken on a life. There has been a lot of use of that, and I'm not sure that I'd want to take it away at this point.
I'm not sure I'd want to take it away at this point, Andre, and I don't think that's as bullish as a lot of people are making it out to be. When you have a presidential candidate like that, the leading one, by the way, for the Republicans, say that I'm not sure I want to take it away. That's not exactly a huge endorsement per se, but nonetheless, a bit of a stronger position than there was in Trump's camp before when he was just saying, I like the dollar.
Yes, no, in a far cry away from saying, it just seems like a scam to me, which was something that he was known for saying. And
True.
If you look at his comments from late February, I mean, he did say that a lot of people are doing it and that he could live with it one way or another. And so him saying, I wouldn't want to take him away at this point, I guess you could say that is vocalizing support in some ways. But this does, as you mentioned, seem to be part of like this broader political strategy on the Republican side of things in order to trying to court people who are, I guess, doing Bitcoin as far as Donald Trump would describe it, Zach.
You doing Bitcoin with your friends, are you, kid? Yeah, I think, I don't know. I mean, as much as everyone always talks about the doomsday scenario where government just comes and outright bans Bitcoin, I mean, we've seen that even in China, and it's not really the case that they outright banned it. And here in the U.S., I feel like we've seen political challenge after political challenge, lawsuits, whenever someone tries to. I mean, it happened with the miners, with the EIA and their survey. I mean, it's increasingly an impressively strong lobby that's been built now recently, the crypto lobby. And we talked a little bit about kind of the political donations, John Deaton in Massachusetts and what's going on elsewhere. I mean, it's kind of inevitable as politicians to kind of start embracing it in the way that President Trump's moving closer to embracing it.
He said he still doesn't own it, which is a little bit different from what we saw with
RFK?
candidates like RFK. Obviously, he he said he bought Bitcoin for his heirs, I
Yes.
believe, after attending Bitcoin Miami. And I know you talked to him a little bit at ETH Denver, and I believe he said, you know, now
He's
it's
looking
time
into it.
look into buying some ETH for his heirs then. So, you know, the politics in crypto continues, but definitely interesting to see Donald Trump touting an orange coin on CNBC Monday morning.
I think it's only a matter of time before he buys it, man. And I think it's only a matter of time before, I mean, how many issues in our day are there where you can have people on both sides of the aisle come around and say, you know what, it's not bad. And I think increasingly, I mean, you've talked about the Democrats too. They don't get enough coverage. There are fewer, I think, and it's farther away from being an official platform. Not that it is for the Republicans, but you've heard Vivek and other candidates that'll probably be close in the Trump circle talking about why crypto is important. Less so on the Democrat side, but still candidates in that party that are still pro-Bitcoin and pro-crypto.
At least publicly, right? Because I think to bring it back to Tom Emmer has talked about when it comes to his own legislation around CBDCs that, you know, there are more people who on the Democratic side who are sympathetic to this bill and stuff, but sort of like towing the party line, if you will, not able to come out and sort of vocalize it publicly. Richie Torres is somebody who I bring up a lot in terms of being somebody, a lawmaker that's, you know, Democratic leaning, but also a champion of digital asset in many ways.
I'm just going back to this chart here, by the way, Texas, because, I mean, at what point, I mean, where on this chart can you show me exactly where the risks, I mean, look at that parabolic move, Andre. It's nuts, right? I just keep bringing this up because I'm pretty sure this is most of what people are getting pulled back into the space with. And if you have been tuned out for maybe, I don't know, the last 2 years, 3 years, and you're just coming back now, think about how different the world in crypto looks compared to where it was in the old all-time high.
Yeah, you know, I've had a few conversations with people who were like really into crypto during like the 2021, 2022 and sort of like walked away from the space. And I think there's a large portion of them out there that kind of just stop paying attention and really aren't aware of the price. And when you do tell them, hey, Bitcoin's at an all-time high now, it definitely raises an eyebrow, to say the least, in terms of just how fast things can change with a year.
It can happen fast, but I mean, think about how much has changed. You got all the big Wall Street firms buying it up, fighting hand over fist to get it. You've got MicroStrategy sitting there saying we didn't spend 2 years building up our stash to just get surpassed like that, so they want to buy more. You've got retail coming back now, looking at what are the other opportunities here. And as we discussed, you barely have wealth advisors now selling these instruments to middle America, shall we say, and the boomers who maybe didn't want to touch it before. And as we know, more excitement builds more excitement. And I still feel like, having been on the ground at ETH Denver, it didn't feel frothy. It wasn't as if everyone was walking around saying, like, we're win Lambo again. It was just the early stages. You put all these things together, again, firmly in the camp, I don't know where you sit, but where I sit, 71K previously would have had me very nervous. Not so this time around. And I think, even though looking at the chart, it seems ridiculous to say, having shot from 30 basically in a straight up fashion to 70, that it's still going to be there at 100K. It sounds dumb, but I don't know what to tell you.
I think my brain is broken, Zach. We've had this conversation a few times at least, but as someone who really started covering crypto during the bear market, you know, I have a different appreciation, I think, for an all-time high than maybe someone who remembers the euphoria from previous cycles or something like that. But, you know, I mean, it's cool to see memes on my timeline of people celebrating all-time high prices and stuff. But I do think that, like, there isn't that straight up euphoria that I think I imagined when it come to. I imagine, like, you know, like dolphin barrel rolls, rainbows and stuff like that.
There's still time.
No, it's really just like BlackRock, you know, buying everything. So.
Still just Michael Saylor in the same background sitting in front of a sailboat talking about digital gold. That some things never change, man, until they do. And maybe that's a good segue.
We do have a big change coming up this week, don't we, Zach?
Indeed, we do. And I don't know if you want to take this one or I should take it, but it is a huge upgrade. We talk so much about Bitcoin, a huge upgrade for the Ethereum ecosystem, as Dencun, the huge Ethereum proposal coming through this week. We're going to be chatting about it a lot on CoinEdge, so you can go to coinedge.media, get all of our reporting on it. But Andre, this one's pretty big when it comes to cost savings.
Yeah, and you know what? You've heard about Dencun before, probably this Ethereum upgrade that's scheduled for March 13th, and you may have heard, you know, it's supposed to make Ethereum cheaper to use from the perspective of gas fees. But like many people, I am wondering just how much cheaper is it going to be to use these L2s networks. And so, I have this article from Unchained that was quite nice, actually, that goes in and explains sort of the technical components of how this is going to work in terms of how the Dencun having this Ethereum Improvement Protocol 4844, also known as proto-dank sharding. It's going to introduce a new sort of mechanism for people to post transactions using rollups called blobs. And essentially, like, what you can imagine is, like, when you are on an Ethereum layer 2, there's a sort of class of them called optimistic rollups that roll up these transactions together, solve them, and then post them to the Ethereum mainnet almost like a receipt. And essentially, like, the difference between call data and blobs in terms of using this mechanism for posting these transactions, Polymarket, which is sort of like a expectations betting sort of platform, is expecting transactions to be cheaper by a factor of 60, essentially reducing $230 in gas fees using call data down to just $4 using blobs. And I found this source over the weekend called l2s.info. I think it's a great source, potentially, if we can pull it up.
Yeah.
But it goes in and it sort of looks at these different sort of scaling solutions that we have now and sort of how much it costs to send ETH, how much it costs to swap tokens. And we're going to check back in here later this week to talk about it. We're having Pantera on the show, definitely going to talk about Dencun, but also talking to some people about L2B. Might do like a dedicated chat associated with that. But, a factor of 60, Zach, really is a significant cost saving when it comes to just sending ETH and swapping tokens.
Yeah, I'm looking at it right now. I mean, we got all these different layer 2 strategies here charted by L2 fees. And I mean, look, if you have 60 times cheaper opportunities to build things, it, even as a community-owned show and what we're trying to do in selling NFTs to co-own our brand with the co-founder of Netflix and all the other people that we have as backers and NFT holders, I mean, it's not cheap to do. But when you can drop fees like that, you can start to do some very interesting things. And that, I think, is my point. My point being that if you were gone for the last 3 years and missed all of the building that's taken place on Ethereum, on Bitcoin, you might think, oh, this number doesn't make any sense. But crypto is not like that. Crypto is not a stock. Crypto is not a company. And it basically has a bunch of builders coming into the ecosystem where it's becoming cheaper to build. How could you not say that this is an entirely different cycle? This is an entirely different world we're now living in. And I think it's exciting to see this next one come through, because all these little tiny upgrades do matter when it comes to real builders, real projects, real cost to consumers. It'd be basically like, I don't know, think about how different e-commerce was when Amazon stepped into the fold and all of a sudden took away shipping and handling and made things free. I mean, it's a huge change, right? Adoption?
Yeah, no, definitely something to take a look at. For me, when the way I'm thinking about it is, if it becomes cheaper to use these layer 2 networks, do you have an increase in terms of on-chain activity, potentially DeFi trading volumes, but also maybe a little bit of a shot in the arm to the NFT market, potentially?
Potentially.
Right? If it becomes cheaper to actually transact in these ways. But, meme coins have been taken off lately in terms of people's popularity, specifically on Solana. Solana-based meme coins, something that people, have been obsessed with, quite frankly, right? So we've got a tweet to show where it's Vitalik Buterin quite literally doing customer support here on Twitter for Ethereum. Let's see if we can pull that up. But, an individual complaining about how much it's costing them to get some meme coins because of the gas fees, and, a comment below from Buterin sort of saying that, the upgrade is going to help a lot with that. So.
I just like the Vitalik comments. Like, he sees these, he comments on them, he says, yeah, we're working on it, it's going to be cheaper. And it's like, you've got people complaining about buying shit coins. And nonetheless, even though he's out there building on this, he does see those comments and replies. But it's going to be exciting. We're going to see it. It's supposedly rolling out on Wednesdays when it's expected to basically take hold. So Dencun is coming, and we will be covering the impacts of that and the rollout, as always, at coinage.media. That's going to do it for this edition of what we do every Monday, and highlighting the best stories in crypto, the biggest headlines that you need to know. As Andre throws up the peace sign, I will throw up the peace sign as well. Thank you for joining us, everybody. For Andre, for myself, for everybody here at Coinage, I want to say thank you again for tuning in. Head to coinage.media to co-own our project with us as we continue to see our NFTs rise. And stay tuned for our next show from Trustless, coming soon. Check out Best of Shever. It's going to do it for us. We'll see you again soon. Have a good day.